I wonder if it's visible. Wednesday, week 3. Still in the ethics part of the course outline. This one today is gonna be, I don't think it'll be as long as the other one last time. So now let me start with some ideas about what, this is the ILO again. What is the ILO and what are they trying to achieve? Of course, they're interested in eliminating food insecurity. They would like to end poverty or lower poverty rates. They're interested in the general overall health increase. That means clean water, clean air, clean water, and infrastructure, education, gender equality. Gender equality is directly correlated to increase in wealth for nations. So the more equal genders are, the better countries tend to do economically. Clean water again, which is connected to health and well-being. Eventually, energy, clean energy, which of course is related to climate action, which maybe should be, well, it's the environment, it's the International Labor Organization, so they're interested in this, but it's not their main focus. Decent work and economic growth, so they're trying to say, like, just because companies have to pay more, it doesn't mean that the businesses' profits will go down to the point where it's going to affect economic growth. In fact, it's always better to give money to people who will spend it than it is to give to companies that may or may not spend it, may or may not reinvest it. So if you're a government and you say, okay, you invested in your company, we're going to give you some tax breaks for that. We'll help you with that because you invested the money, but we don't want to just give you, during the pandemic, for example, they just gave money to companies straightforward without asking them what they're going to spend it on. So knowing what kind of investment is probably more important for economic growth than it is having people get higher salaries. People who get more money, who are economically getting out of poverty, spend everything they have. They don't save much. So that money goes back into the economy and creates demand and creates growth. They want to say they're committed to innovation and infrastructure. Not sure how they do that. They must have some policies. Of course, reducing inequality means taking on the big companies. Sustainability, obviously connected to affordable clean energy, obviously connected to climate action, but also in a community form, building communities. I think that's something that can replace unions. The union was very powerful in the 20th century. Unions almost fought up to the level of management for their rights. When we think about weekends, we think about unions. When we think about 40-hour work weeks, when we think about vacation time, pretty much all the benefits that we get are the result of unions. Otherwise, the companies would just, they wouldn't just decide to give up anything on their own. Responsible consumption, so on the consumer side, they want to build awareness of which companies are exploiting workers. Climate action, sea, climate, life below water, try to eliminate waste, life on land, try to protect the soil. Peace and justice, strong institutions. So that's basically saying that they support, laws being enforced. Anti-corruption, that's what that is. Partnerships, develop partnerships, always a good idea. I'm in the book on page 99. Globalization has provided opportunities for many countries, but it also has led to increased inequality and a growing gap between the world's richest and poorest nations. That's a way of saying that inequality is the global, unregulated, capitalist, multinational system has led to a consolidation of power of certain big companies that have achieved economies of scale, that have not had any competitors to deal with because they can squash them immediately. It can create political roadblocks to them being able to get going. So there has been growing inequality, even though the bottom of the lowest levels of poverty have come up. The middle class is the one that's kind of not moving. It's kind of stuck in, it's not, the rich are getting much richer, the poorest people are getting out of poverty slowly, but the middle class is kind of falling, and that's where this change is happening. While companies use low-cost countries to grow their profits, there is still poverty, social instability, and conflict. The low-cost countries do not necessarily see the benefits of globalization, which was supposed to be the point. If poor countries have better employment standards and comparable pay and conditions and safety, then they would no longer be attractive as targets for offshoring and outsourcing. So this, I think, is the phrase ethical dilemma is where you get stuck here. The ethical dilemma is you can make more profits by exploiting. So governments of countries with cheap labor, like China, for a long time pursued policies of keeping their currency very weak so they can export more. And they even forced savings out of their citizens. They forced them to save some money instead of just spending it so they don't push inflation and demand and prices up. And so those countries, they want to, China's a funny one because they didn't just have a strategy of being like the factory of the world or cheap labor. They had a strategy of first taking this cheap labor, investing all this money into infrastructure and building and cities and subways and building the country, and then shifting away from that kind of manufacturing. They still do a whole lot of the manufacturing, but they're not as dependent on the manufacturing as they were before. You don't want to be dependent on it because it can move away. So governments, especially democracies who might be in that area, they're afraid. They're like, oh wow, if we change policies and unemployment goes up, then what happens to us? Well, we get thrown out of office because the people are not happy because unemployment is high and they have no jobs. So there's all kinds of ethical dilemmas in play. So the IILO, they're here to try to create some global standards. They've been around since a long, long time. 1919, International Workers of the World was part of their organization. And they tried to unify the unions of the world. Of course, that was a huge goal of socialist countries. The International Labor Organization has been setting standards for employment to ensure that along with economic growth, there's social justice, prosperity, and peace for all. These international labor standards are legal instruments which define basic minimum standards in the world of work. The main things that the IILO can do is to get countries to agree to treaties. If they sign a treaty, that means they agree to do what the treaty says. But then there's these other non-binding, this is what they call them, non-binding guidelines, which provide suggestions. Those are pretty weak, but the conventions are like the Paris Agreement. The countries who sign are supposed to follow the directions, or at least the limits and the KPIs that are part of the treaty. The ILO has four main mandates that they are interested in here at the bottom of page 99. These are probably things you should remember. The elimination of discrimination related to employment and occupation. The elimination of discrimination, so that means all those elements that we saw in the EEO. The effective abolition. Abolition means no longer any child labor anywhere. 3, eliminate slave labor, forced labor. That's what it is. There is still slave labor happening in the world. And finally, the rights of unions to organize. That's what's called collective bargaining. Freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining. So support for unions, no child labor, end of slave labor, and also discrimination issues. There's a big page here on page 100 about child labor. I don't need to go through all of it. It's too much information that you would not be needing to use on an exam. So I feel that it's pretty wasteful space. I will play one video. I think I showed it last, was it last semester? I don't know. But it was like about how some innovations, it was about innovation and how some companies found innovative ways to create sustainable fashion models, like the one, Rent the Runway, where you could rent things instead of buying them all the time and throwing them away. I'm on page 101. This fashion business is really where there's a lot of documentaries about fast fashion because it's quite awful. But I'll just put this one short one on there. It's from The Economist. I know we saw that one. Oh, wait, that's the one we saw, the true cost of fast fashion. And where they try to explain how there's innovations that are helping. Let's do this.
Boring, wake up. Today is Black Friday. Do you want to go with me?
Mom, good morning. Wait a second, I'm coming.
Barney, look at this. Wow! Did you want to come in?
No, Mom. I prefer going to the bookstore.
Okay, see you later.
Wow, so many books.
That was the worst choice of my clicking life. I cannot even imagine what I just clicked. It's like, is this Vietnamese? What is happening?
Whoa, adaptive minded math! Come explore the site with me. I'm in for
Wow, this is horrible. What is happening? Alright, maybe there's some good statistics. Yeah, so we all kind of know that it's one of the most polluting industries in the world. Yes, so much pollution. Just a horrible amount of pollution coming out of this industry. But that's not really news, right? The most serious problem is fast fashion companies exploit their workers. Everything's bad about it, right? The whole thing is just... I mean, America is a very trash creating culture. We create so much waste, it's unbelievable. But it's fairly recent. My grandmother, she used to save everything. I never saw her throw anything away. I don't think I ever saw her throw anything away. She would always convince us that we should fix things instead of throwing them away. And it was like, things were made to be repaired. And that's where all that really starts, the 50s and 40s, 50s, and 60s, after the Second World War, where a consumer economy developed that just got crazier and crazier. More trends, more fashion, more garbage, more waste. Never fix anything. Anything that is like 2 or 3 years old is like already out of fashion. It's all just, it's amazing that world is not that long ago. My grandmother, talking about she was older, but 1960s and 70s, these values, they still existed. Which leads to the last issue that I want to focus on here from our list, which is environmental sustainability, page 101. Companies today, it says, are making an effort to put sustainable practices into action. They're motivated by protecting the environment and society and by creating goodwill for their brands. That's the triple bottom line: profit, people, planet. Triple bottom line. So I think we can go back to that triple bottom line idea for a second.
In this short video, we're going to take a look at a popular model when looking at corporate social responsibility. It's called Elkington's triple bottom line. Now, the idea of the triple bottom line is to encourage businesses to appreciate that there is more to business activity and the purpose of business than simply making a profit, even though that's important. So the triple bottom line is a way of assessing and reporting business performance based on three areas: profit, people, and planet, the three Ps. John Elkington is the guy who has developed the triple bottom line. He's dedicated his life, his professional career, to encouraging businesses to think more broadly about how their activities impact on society, and in particular encouraging them to adopt sustainable business models. The reason for this, he's not alone of course, is that there's a view that businesses have for too long focused on a narrow measure of performance. We've assumed traditionally that businesses exist to maximise their profit. That's the traditional measure of business success, and of course there are lots of other measures that are linked to profit, not the least the value of the business, or the share price is very closely linked with the achievement of profit by a business, and in many cases management and employee incentives and bonuses are based on profit. So profit is important, but it's not the only factor that businesses should consider. That's the concept of the triple bottom line. In other words, there's more than just one bottom line, there are others. The triple bottom line suggests there's more to business success than profit. It tries to encourage a business to report and measure, of course, the financial performance of the business, but also its social and its environmental performance. And so therefore there's these three Ps. There's profit, there's planet, and there's people. What do each of these three represent? Well, for profit, of course, we're very familiar with this. Businesses are required to report the profit that they achieve over a given period, and of course that's reported in the income statement. And a key point here is that that is normally a pretty reliable figure, in particular because for public companies and for larger private companies, the income statement is part of the financial statements that are audited. For planet, we're looking here to see how the business activities impact on the environment. Now this gets a bit more tricky because whilst there are some measures of impact on environment, such as measuring carbon emissions or measuring the extent to which the inputs into the production process are sustainable, there are other factors that are less easy to measure. And people is perhaps the hardest element of the triple bottom line to measure. It tries to assess the extent to which a business is socially responsible. That's pretty hard to calculate, and certainly to compare the social responsibility of one business with another. Well, taking the triple bottom line concept, it clearly has some potential benefits and value to business. Perhaps the most important of which is that it has encouraged, along with other models of CSR, it's encouraged businesses to think beyond simply profit as the only relevant measure of performance. And it's very much encouraged and facilitated wider reporting, particularly by public companies, of their CSR activities. However, there are some criticisms and drawbacks of the triple bottom line approach. Not the least because, as we've already mentioned, two of the three Ps, people and planet, are quite difficult to measure, and in particular to ensure consistency and comparability between one business and another. Another criticism, of course, is that it's still not a legal requirement for businesses to report on their CSR activities and performance and on their impact on the environment. So this has been an overview of Elkington's triple bottom line.
We live in strange times.
So what we're talking about there is setting KPIs, right? How do we set KPIs that are going to support the different goals that we're trying to set for profit, which is super easy, but also what are the different types of KPIs we might be able to figure out for planet. I think those ones we can talk about, the emissions and CO2. There are a lot of organizations that try to calculate these numbers and decreasing, which allows them to make some total comparing how much CO2 that a country gives, and then the CO2 of the country can be turned into carbon credits. You can monetize all of those things, and then you can use that as a KPI to measure the overall CO2 decrease and also how much each company decreases their CO2. Super complicated KPIs, and hopefully you have an honest government or organization that's calculating, or else it doesn't work. People, I think people is not super hard. You can measure quality of life by literacy. You can measure quality of life by poverty. You can measure quality of life by access to healthcare and education. You can measure quality of life by the quality of the clean water and air around. Going higher, you can measure it by what kind of opportunities people have, social mobility, income inequality. So there's a lot of different ways that you can set KPIs that are going to lead to the triple bottom line. A lot of companies, we want to believe that they really want to do it. Globalization, however, has increased the level at which businesses rely on each other to deliver products and services to the market. This is called the supply chain. Supply chains are really, really complex at this time. It's very, very rare that you find a country where they make a manufactured product or electronics where all the parts, pieces and components come from one country. Very difficult. There can't, maybe China, maybe some manufacturing countries, but it's so complicated that the dependence of one country and company on others means that you don't actually have a really great chance to control all of the environmental issues that can happen and exploitation that can happen of resources before the end product. It would be almost impossible. We had some terrible cases of labor, slavery. Basically, Thai fishing boats from Thailand, I'm sure they're not the only country, but in this case they would kidnap people from Myanmar to work as slaves on their fishing boats. So, and then what do? Just throw them in the ocean when they're dead? It's incredible, right, to think that this is what's happening. But it's cruel. It's extremely, there's a lot of cruelty there, and a lot of, but then what happens is the fish boat doesn't have something on the boat that says the name of the brand of what kind of product you buy in the shop. This fish gets sold to another wholesale market, which gets sold in another market where people bid on it, lowest price, sold to, Nestle, which is sold to a dog food company, which is sold to another company, and then you see it as a brand called Happy Fish. So it's very difficult to be able to make sure that your supply chain is ethical, and it's very, very difficult. Globalization has increased the level at which businesses rely on each other to deliver products and services to the market. Improved technology, communication, and distribution channels have increased the reach of Australian businesses. So on the one hand, there's opportunities to work together. On the other hand, it needs to be managed and it needs to be regulated. Business decisions and activities can have an impact on other countries, not just locally. Companies are often coming up with green initiatives. I know that Vietnam is talking very seriously, finally, about eliminating plastic from packaging and basic consumer waste. There's so much. This is crazy, especially during this pandemic. You see mass in the street. People are not really recycling. Who wants to touch it? People just throw stuff in the street. There's thousands of straws because nobody ever uses the same cup twice. I bet, I don't know, 50% of the time, maybe more, we don't use the same cup ever again, right? One use only. So it's very, very complex. So green initiatives can come from companies, but they can also, come from the government, which is what this plastic initiative is trying to do. Hopefully companies get better at packaging. Sometimes there's efficiencies that we find in packaging that work better, that actually create less waste. Coca-Cola cans are much lighter than they used to be. They use about half the aluminum, which is pretty good. Companies can manage sustainability proactively in their supply chain. For example, by ensuring that they do not import or retail timber or other things that have been illegally or made with slave labor harvested. Companies can make a commitment to sustainability by demanding that their suppliers are sustainable. So that means that your middle management needs to be pretty strong in order to make the argument that they don't choose the cheapest thing all the time, right? That they also choose what is ethically sourced and the cheapest they can find. So this is actually maybe an interesting development because it means that there is a role for middle managers, right? They're used to top managers, they're the Steve Jobs, they're the vision, the long-term vision. The implementation of the vision is like middle-term, middle managers, and the day-to-day operation, short-term KPIs are set for the frontline workers of organization. So now, and then the leadership would be part of the vision and the productivity, right? It's mostly like that. But maybe there is a leadership role for middle managers that comes out of this, since they really need to be the ones to be choosing ethical suppliers, to be making ethical resource decisions. Because resource decisions used to be just like, okay, how much capital do we have? How much labor? How much do we put it here, do this, produce this, separate, allocate, and then produce. But now it's like a whole nother level where the middle managers who used to be just pushing pencils around now need to have some ethical decision-making power, which can be good because it's if you just the more people that are in the organization who recognize that there are ethics involved in the choices that the company makes, the better it's going to be. So that might change part of the next section where we talk about leadership versus management. That definitely might mean that middle managers are starting to get more into the leadership aspect of management. I want to do one more thing today, maybe. So they have awards for this kind of thing, which is also like the PR, environmentally and friendly and sustainable companies. Always surprising to me how they're going to measure this.
Hey y'all, Corey here from Grow Ensemble, and in this video You're going to learn about 7 of the world's most environmentally friendly and sustainable companies. One of these companies has gone even so far as to set the bold and ambitious goal to plant 1 billion trees across the globe by the year 2030. Coming up, you're going to learn exactly who that company is, as well as get 6 other examples of sustainable brands who are truly in business to save our home planet. Let's dive in. So first, we have Tentry. As Tentry's CEO, Derek Emsley, told me on our podcast, Tentry is a tree planting company that just so happens to as well sell apparel. Since their founding in 2012, Tentry has already planted over 50 million trees. And as mentioned in the top of this video, they've as well set the ambitious goal of planting 1 billion trees all across the globe by the year 2030. Tentry selectively chooses to partner with charitable organizations to execute on these tree planting programs. And they've made a commitment themselves to regularly visit the sites of these tree planting projects to make sure that the local communities in which they're taking place are benefiting in a variety of ways, economically as well as environmentally. As a result of Tentry's practices and commitments to transparency, millions of trees have been successfully planted in countries all across the world, spanning Canada, Indonesia, Senegal, Peru, Madagascar, and many more. And of course, Tentry is committed to sustainably producing their apparel line. They're wanting to push the standards of the fashion industry by using sustainable materials like organic cotton, hemp, recycled polyester, and tencel. And yes, you may have put it together already with their name, but Tentry plants 10 trees for every item purchased through their store so that they can make everyday change more accessible to all of us. Second on our list, we have Patagonia, but we may have not been surprised by this one. For their nearly 50 years in business, Patagonia has been on the cutting edge of what it means to be a sustainable and environmentally friendly company. And as Patagonia proudly and explicitly states, they are in business to save our home planet. For the last 35 years, Patagonia has pledged 1% of their total sales to the conservation of our natural environment. And it was this practice that led Yvonne Chenault. Girl Ensemble are a part of. So other businesses too can make this meaningful does here at Girl Ensemble are a part of. So other businesses too can make this meaningful, consistent contribution to environmental protection. And now Patagonia is approaching $90 million in contributions to international and national grassroots environmental organizations. You may even remember that Patagonia was behind suing a former president in 2017 to preserve national monuments. Patagonia has diligently reviewed, assessed, and improved the sustainability of their supply chains. And now a lion's share of the materials that they use in their products are either recycled or grown organically. They even have the goal to become completely carbon neutral by 2025. And Patagonia really is the way that it is because of its founder, Yvon Chouinard. And so if you haven't yet, highly recommend reading Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon himself for a little more of the background behind Patagonia's environmental and social philosophies. And third on our list, we have Allbirds. So while Allbirds is already a completely carbon neutral shoe and apparel company, they've as well set the goal to be a completely zero carbon company. And so while companies can claim carbon neutrality, that typically means that they're just offsetting what sort of carbon emissions they can't reduce just yet with carbon credits, some sort of carbon capture programming. But Allbirds is wanting to take that a step further. Allbirds wants to commit to emitting no carbon in the first place. And
So 2 points, and then I'll let you go. First point is that there is, of course, a need for us to. These are beautiful companies who really try, and they started their companies with this goal in mind, so they didn't have to adapt some kind of model of sustainability or CSR. They started with that goal. So that makes it a bit easier. Number two, Patagonia is pretty big, but in general, they're not huge companies. And it's, the smaller companies get a competitive advantage. It's almost, it's even better for marketing for small companies because you usually don't get the economy scale benefit that you get from a bigger company, so at least you get the benefit of the environmental friendliness. So the issue is really, how do we get big multinational conglomerate companies to be able to have the same attitude that these small companies put forward? And you saw it mentioned that this company already contributed something like $90 million, which is good, to the causes of sustainability. But we're working in billions now. We're working in billions and we're working in trillions. A billion is 1,000 million. So 90 million is almost 1/10 of a billion. But the issues that we faced and the things that we have to really put towards, preserving, especially in the face of global warming, are going to take billions and billions and billions. So these numbers are pretty meaningless until you get to like billions. And actually, they don't ever really become meaningful until you know what the costs are of what you're trying to do. So good for the companies who do try. We need to focus on bigger companies and companies with diverse supply chains, and to figure out how to regulate those supply chains, or at least hold the company accountable for their suppliers. And last but not least, we need the biggest companies to take this role on much more seriously than they do now. So that's environmental. Next class, I'm going to just talk about leadership, probably for an hour, and then I think we are going to be moving towards economic and political. And that'll be week 4, political and economic factors in the pest. Bye-bye.